Hi, folks. Welcome back to Leader Be Led. Now, if you tuned in last week, you know we did part one of our interview with Dr. Henry Cloud. Dr. Cloud is the author of a new book called Boundaries for Leaders, and he has so much great material, and our interview went so well that I wanted you to really take this all in two pieces. So please join me in watching the second half of my interview with Dr. Henry Cloud. I mean, leaders cannot be strong at every single thing, okay?
Exactly.
So if a leader finds they have a weakness, how do they address that with either self correction or perhaps what I would call backfill? And that is finding somebody else that's good at that and leaving it up to them.
Okay, this is such an important question, especially in the last, probably 6 or 8 years, when we've seen the emergence of the strengths movement, which is very important research. You know, it started at Gallup and it's gone throughout a lot of different places now. And it's very important that we make a distinction between strengths and weaknesses in a gift set versus a character or a personality or a relational or an EQ set. Okay? So here's the point. When you go to strengths, a leader does not have every strength. A quarterback is not a nose guard. Okay? A point guard is not a forward or a center. And so you're not supposed to have all of the gifts and all of the strengths. And what Gallup and Marcus Buckingham, a lot of those guys have done a great job at is helping people find what are you supposed to be doing, and exactly what you said, Al, build a team around you and an organization that has every single slot filled. Like, you know, Colin said, get the right seats on the bus, right?
Yeah.
So don't ever feel like as a leader, you've got to have all the gifts or all the strengths. Now, here's the second issue. What that does not let you off the hook of is if you have personal, emotional, stylistic, interpersonal, performance, other kinds of issues that we all need to get to a basic level of maturity on. We don't get a pass on those. You know, you can't be a jerk and say, well, I'm just not a people person. You know, or you can't be a people person and never turn anything in on time and say, well, I'm just not task oriented. Well, if I'm your boss, I tell you, you know, well, go do that somewhere else because here you got to show up and produce something. So that's a big distinction that leaders need to make.
Yeah, and that, you know, that does sound pretty clinical, Dr. Cloud. I'm not going to lie. And then, you know, we're on the heels of having lost an actor that meant a lot to Americana in Tony Soprano. With James Gandolfini. And while you're talking, it reminds me of a Wall Street Journal article that I read over the weekend about this guy who had all these character flaws. And, you know, call it what you want to. He was a leader in some respects, not the kind of leader we would all envision ourselves to be. But the guy struggled. And, you know, he had two sides of his life that he was trying to bring together and work on his relationships, no?
Yes, but let's broaden the pie a little bit. I wrote a book called Integrity,
Right.
and if you do the normal Jay Leno thing on the street, and you know how Leno walks out there and says, "So what's the capital of the United States?" and puts the mic out there, and somebody goes,
Seattle, Washington.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you go ask the normal person, what is integrity?
Right.
The answer they're going to give you, generally speaking, is something about morals or ethics. Somebody's believable, they don't lie, they're ethical, who they are in the dark is the same as the light, they're not duplicitous. And what we've done is we've reduced the meaning of integrity to only moral and ethical functioning. All right? Now, let me ask you a question. Haven't you ever worked for a leader who would not lie, cheat, or steal or murder somebody like Tony Soprano, but in other words, they're totally moral and ethical, but given the chance, you'd never work for them again.
Right.
So what is the rest of this stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, so the rest of this, what integrity means, the word literally, remember in your math class, integer is a whole number.
Sure.
So integrity means complete. It doesn't mean perfect. It means complete. And so what we want to see in a leader, you don't have to have perfection. It's not like you don't have flaws, but there are central character traits morals and ethics are one of those. But there's other things like the ability to build and maintain trust, the ability to lean into negative realities in a way that resolves them instead of beating people up, the ability to have control of oneself in a way that drives results. So you're ready, aim, fire, for example, and not impulsive like fire, ready, aim, and go
Right.
buy a company before you do your due diligence. There are these things that have to do with wholeness of character that are not the Tony Soprano issues of I'm struggling with, wanting to kill somebody and I can't integrate the good and evil within me to come to some sort of transcendent way. It's not that simplistic.
Right, right, right. So it's hard. I mean, leadership is relational. Leadership is truly dealing with people. It's more than just, the profit and the loss statements. It's dealing with that team. And,
Right.
we are in an age right now where there are a lot of young leaders who find themselves, especially in technology, find themselves at a pretty young age being in charge, being a CEO, where before they've had the chance to experience relational, differences and agreements and creativity, they find themselves in that top seat as a leader. What advice do you have for these young leaders who go from 0 to 60 in such a short period of time and have to call themselves leaders quickly?
Yeah, I would say that first of all, congratulations. If you're in that position, what that says is that you've brought something of value and something to the table that people want. Now, here's what you've got to do. You got to make sure that the something that you brought of value, that you don't drink the Kool-Aid and think that that something means that you bring everything to the table. Okay? So really important to get a board of advisors or a board of directors or find out who the stakeholders are and let them get in a structure where they speak into what the gaps are that also have to be around you to make this thing work long term. Just because you're creative or just because you're a technological genius or a marketing genius does not mean that you also have operational strengths or that you have organizational strengths or that you have financial strengths. And just make sure you've got it around you. And then have some structured system. Like I'm a leadership coach. The way I spend my time is I have structured programs with CEOs and others where over the course of the year, we're going to get together with however many times, and we're going to work on the issues that are going to make sure that you don't kick yourself in the rear end screwing up all of your strengths. And that's what they've got to do.
So do you offer also tools for a leader to, develop themselves, develop their team, bring it all together so that while they're trying to make this, technology company that's really has explosive growth happen, at the same time they have, Dr. Cloud on their shoulder giving them advice and helping them?
Well, one of the things about technology, and it's kind of interesting, I think we found our context or ourselves in a context now where in a lot of ways business and leadership development, like all other education, are changing. In fact, did you ever read The Innovator's Dilemma by Clay Christensen?
No, I have not.
From Harvard Business School. He's the guy that talked Andy Grove into turning Intel away from a memory company into a processor company.
Ah, okay.
And the whole construct or theory that he has, which is more than a theory, it's just reality, is that the leaders in any industry basically always get their butts kicked because they're winning. And what happens is, because they're winning, a lot of times innovative technologies don't fit their metrics because the market's not big enough for that yet. It's not developed enough. We're making too much money over here. And a little upstart company changes the industry, and these guys are gone, and it's too late to catch up.
Right.
So that's the innovator's dilemma, is you've got to, if you're winning, you got to also find a way to make sure innovation is continuing to happen as if you're not winning. Now, he said recently that Harvard Business School, for example, is set up exactly to have that kind of disruption, because in today's environment, who wants to spend $120,000 to get a degree and find yourself in a market where you're in debt with this MBA and nobody can hire you at what you need. And so the model itself, something's wrong with it. And now people are going online to get MBAs, and companies themselves are doing more. Instead of sending people to get MBAs, they're doing more of this in-house. And so what I do as a profession, you know, I work in companies with CEOs and with executive teams and other levels doing leadership development, right? Now, what I find is there is this gap in companies that it starts at about 10 or 15 million. You know, a guy has an idea and he builds a shop, and now he's got a business, he's got to lead people.
Right.
That from that number to about 3 or 4 billion, they're outsourcing this stuff. You know, they're sending people to Harvard or Center for Creative Leadership or other places. And it's not until they get pretty big that they have an internal leadership development track that's pretty thought out. And so what I'm doing is I'm creating virtual leadership development that companies can do in-house. And I've just launched the first one called Building High Performance Teams. And basically what I do is I come into your team to either form it or reboot it and take them through a retreat and a process where they go through the entire process of structuring the team in terms of its purpose and its goals and its values and the behavior and the behavioral covenants that are going to make those values a reality that drive results, and then the activities and the roles and the conflicts and the accountability systems and all of that. And it's a virtual experience. And I think that one of the things that we're going to see is companies more and more figuring out how to do internal leadership development that's like my product. It's mobile, it's customizable, it's inexpensive, instead of sending people to very expensive MBAs.
Yeah, that makes complete sense too, especially the use of virtual and the fact that, as we're doing right now, you can join a team and stay, you know, at your base in Los Angeles and be anywhere in the world. So that makes fantastic sense.
And if they go, and I'll get the plug in here, if they go to drcloud.com, drcloud.com, and click on Building a High Performance Team, they can find out all about it.
All right, good deal. Well, you know, Dr. Cloud, you know, as I've seen your style, you're a pretty easygoing guy. You're very funny. You're laid back. Now, is that the clinical psychologist that I'm seeing, or is that the formative Dr. Cloud? I mean, who do we have here as a person?
But I think the laid back style is, I found out a number of years ago that when my mother when my mother was pregnant with me in her 40s, and at that time not a lot of people had babies at 40s, and they thought she was sick for a number of months. They gave her Demerol shots every day. So I think my brain got fried in utero. And I'm just sort of this, you know, mellow guy on Demerol, I think is what happened. So.
Well, all right, I'm going to take that as the answer. But, you know, I mean, that was a leading question, because in this last Chick-fil-A Leadercast, you interviewed the anti-Henry Cloud. You were on stage interviewing. He's one of my favorite leaders, and I've had a chance to have a number of conversations with Jack Welch, former chairman of GE. But, you know, when I heard the two of you were going to be on stage together, I thought, what are they thinking? You know, I mean, these are just two completely different guys. And I was afraid that Welch was actually going to eat you up and spit you out. But, you know, you were just fantastic with him. How did you prepare for that interview?
Well, I think I've been preparing for it, you know, for over 2 decades in dealing with leaders in this way, that when you study leadership, there are some things that Jack Welch did that are the most important things to do. And in fact, I wrote a book called Necessary Endings. And what that book is about is how much trouble leaders have figuring out when to step up and something should end, whether it's an employee, it could be a product line, it could be, you know, a strategy. You know, why did it take a bankruptcy judge to get the executives at General Motors to shut down Pontiac? It hadn't made a profit in 40 years.
Sure.
Jack Welch was the master, and I know he got a lot of flack for a lot of different reasons. If you read the book, I write about all of this. But he was the master at truly necessary endings around a vision. And one of the things that he said was that if they weren't, and he had a vision, if they weren't number 1 or 2 in a market in a particular business, they would fix it, sell it, or shut it down. And so for years, I've been a big fan of Jack in a lot of the things that he does. And I love his passion for developing people. And so I just had a blast. And if you're watching, I mean, he was a scream. I was laughing as hard as he was. And I think we just had a fun time.
Well, you did. In fact, we have a clip of that right now. So let's just give a little taste of Dr. Henry Cloud and Jack Welch.
When you were teaching and observing these people, one of the things that I've read about was you had a very clear, you could put it on a chart, that if somebody was an outstanding performer and they shared your values, they got put into a move them up circle.
Right.
If somebody was not quite performing up to where they ought to be, but they shared your values, they got put into a improve them and help them.
Let me just run through this
Why
quickly.
don't you give us your chart?
Since it's my thing. Well, we talked about behaviors, right? And we talked about performance numbers. Now, you measure your folks on behaviors on the bottom axis, performance numbers on the left. High performance, high values, upper right-hand corner, easy, onward and upward. Lower left, bad performance, bad behaviors, just as easy, out the door. So you got those two. Now you've got two other quadrants. One of them is, has the values, low performance. Maybe he had a problem at home. Maybe going through a sickness or something. Give them another chance. If they got the values, give them a couple chances. Because if you've got people on your team that buy into the behaviors you want them on your team.
Well, Dr. Cloud, that is amazing, seeing you with Jack Welch on stage, and he is a character, and certainly there's so much to learn from him, and there's tons to learn from you. So what is next for Dr. Henry Cloud?
Well, I'm really spending a lot of time, in addition to my waking hours with leaders and companies, I still do a lot of CEO coaching and executive team kinds of development, but I'm really working a lot on virtual leadership development, and I'm creating a lot of products where teams at all levels of organizations can very inexpensively take emerging leaders, kind of leadership 101, and building in the skills and the skill sets and competencies that they need in the discipline of leadership that oftentimes they just don't get. And so I'm working hard on the virtual side of that.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, you had a telecast for Necessary Endings, and it's amazing. I had a young leader on the phone this morning that worked for me. In fact, I'll give him a shout out. His name is Sean McKenna. And Sean said, hey, you're interviewing Dr. Henry Cloud today. Boy, I remember that Necessary Endings. And man, if he did not hit me with 5 or 6 great bullet points from both the book and the webinar that you did on Necessary Endings, I was just floored by how much he remembered, but how important your material was to him. So I'm going to ask my team if they could put the book that you have right now out on the market up on the screen. I'm going to tell everybody to run out and grab Boundaries for Leaders. In fact, any of the Boundaries material, just awesome for relationships by Dr. Henry Cloud. But Dr. Henry Cloud, if you could give me one more time that website for folks to check out and find your material.
It's www.drcloud.com.
That is outstanding. I can't thank you enough for being here today. It has been a complete honor. I wish we could do this for hours on end, but I bet you probably have other things to do, and we're just thrilled you could be a guest here on Leader Be Led. Thanks, Dr. Cloud.
It's been good to be with you, and good luck in all you're doing.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Well, folks, that about wraps up another episode of Leader Be Led, and that was a great one. Dr. Henry Cloud has so much great material that I really urge you to go out and get his current book, Boundaries for Leaders, as well as Necessary Endings and all of his other material. Great stuff. With that, I want to remind you, spread the word about Leader Be Led. Tell your friends, send out some links. Certainly share, comment on either YouTube or on the website. Tell us what you think about the show and give us suggestions for guests that you'd like to see in the future. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you really soon on Leader Be Led, Web TV for Leaders.